followed by an announcement on the loud hailer system, please leave the floor immediately using the emergency door as demonstrated. Ladies wearing high-heel shoes must walk carefully or remove the high heels to prevent injury whilst evacuating the building. Please also assist people with disabilities to evacuate the building. Proceed to the nearest assembly point, which is clearly demarcated outside in green signage. Our fire marshals, who will be dressed in clearly Henley marked reflective bibs, will direct you to the nearest point. Please do not try to re-enter the building until instructed that it is safe to do so. Smoking is only permitted in these two designated smoking areas. On behalf of the school's management, I hope you will have an enjoyable experience at Henley. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you all at Henley Business School at this year's SONA, post-SONA dialogue by Black Management Forum. I welcome you all in the name of love, in the month of love. So I will ask you to smile to the person next to you and don't say I love you because you can be in trouble. I don't want marriages ending and situationships ending. Please don't say I love you. Before we start, I would like us to lay a few rules of engagement. We will operate with love as we share our rights as fellow compatriots in Africa. We'll keep the time allocated so that we can go home on time and continue with our plans for the week. We'll also keep our questions concise. My name is Wendy Selinyana. I'm a long-standing BMF member, year 11 this year, and have served within the BMF at provincial level, in the Eastern Cape, and not only that, also at a branch level. I am an active citizen. I don't wait for government to do things. If I see an area that I can have influence in, I act accordingly. Ladies and gentlemen, with those words, I would like to acknowledge our guests. Firstly, those who are online, to say greetings to you and thank you for your patience and joining us this evening. And secondly, I would like to honor and appreciate our guests who have set time to be here. Our panelists, first of all, Professor Mohale, and secondly, I would like to acknowledge Ms. Mpho Malopyane. If I pronounce it incorrectly, I apologize in advance. And I would like to also acknowledge Dr. Rutendo Hwindingwi, who has come to join us this evening. I would also like to acknowledge our VIPs and partners, Henley Business School and Alexander Forbes. And lastly, acknowledge our BMF president, deputy president, and the BMF board, who have made sure that today we are here to look at how we move South Africa forward. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, thought leaders, and change makers, today we gather at a defining moment for South Africa's economy, South Africa's economy, transformation agenda, and global positioning. In the wake of the president's address, we are not just here to analyze policy. We are here to interrogate its real impact on business, communities, and South Africa's standing in an increasingly complex geopolitical landscape. The world around us is shifting rapidly. The global economy is still recalibrating post-pandemic, and emerging markets, South Africa included, are navigating new trade realities, evolving partnerships, and a technological revolution that is reshaping industry faster than we can legislate for them. The question is, how do we as leaders in business, policy, and governance ensure that South Africa not only adapts, but thrives? With that question in mind, I will invite a representative from Henley Business School. Oh, I was told that we will go directly to our president before we call our Henley representative. At this point, I would like to call upon our president, our Black Management President, Mr. Mpho Malopyane.
Program Director, good evening. It's a full house, President. It's long we've been waiting for the BMF to look like this. And people are really saying we want to go back and become professionals. We are very excited. And now the BMF will do his job, which is to work on the aspect of transformation, what is meant to be. Thank you, Program Director, for this opportunity to allow us to come here. Special greetings to our guest, Prof. Bonang Mohale, Mpho Malopyane. We like your relationship that we have with you, and we want it to keep on growing. And thanks for holding on to us, even if it was tough that time, and you hold on and you were resilient. We really thank you for being there for us. Dr. Rutendo Hwindingwi, right? Thank you very much, sir, for allowing to come to the BMF and accepting the invitation. The management of the Black Management Forum, its members and attendees who are here, thanks MD for organizing this with your team, Cool, and as well as the marketing team that made sure that this event becomes oversubscribed, as I can see. Those who are young, stand up. We as the BMF have issued a statement, Prof, conveying our disappointment by the State of the Nation address that was delivered on Thursday, 6 February. And it got people talking. I tried to meet the president or what? I'm like, the BMF that we know, we critically criticize and correctly so. Our view was that SONA did not dive deep enough into the merit of socio-economic challenges facing the country. And at least how this would be tangibly resolved to bring about transformation. Instead, it relied heavily on the country's resilience to weather the challenges that we have. We are on the view that we cannot, as a state, operate at the reaction mode. We need to be proactive, deliberate, and purposeful, design the socio-economic path to focus our efforts towards achieving our goals. Transformation will not be achieved simply by putting it on paper. It needs bold action steps to be taken for it to be realized. And mentioned and tabled the medium-term development plan, which will advance 3 strategic priorities: First, to drive inclusive growth and job creation. Secondly, to reduce poverty and tackle the high cost of living. Thirdly, to build a capable and ethical and developmental state. But there's something fundamentally wrong with the way these strategic actions are prioritized. My view is that we must focus our attention on building capable, ethical, and developmental state. It starts at the head. Once you have a leader that is not ethical, whatever it is that you're going to do is just going to move to the wrong direction. We are an ethical organization and we need to focus there. Once we have capable and ethical and development state, we will then focus our attention and resources on driving inclusive growth and job creation, which is in turn will respond to the reduction of poverty amongst people and tackle the high cost of living. I concur with the view of the president that our most urgent task is to grow our economy so that we can create jobs, reduce poverty, improve the lives of all South Africans. What I'm dealing with is that he did not make it clear how we as the country are going to execute the urgent task. The BMF needs to engage the president in this regard, because unless the how part is ironed out, we may not necessarily know how is it going to be able to achieve. Then it's going to be a talk shop. And therefore, no change will be realized if we don't know what are the goals and the target, how are you going to achieve this and by when? And who's responsible to that? Who's the person we are going to hold accountable to say, but you said you're going to achieve this by this and when? What's happening now? Part of the BMF vision for the next 3 years is to encourage graduates to venture into entrepreneurship and strengthen the support of entrepreneurs as a weapon to fight high rate of unemployment. So we welcome the setting up of Transformation Fund worth 20 billion a year over the next 5 years to fund Black-owned and small enterprises. We also welcome the support for women entrepreneurs. However, it should not be aimed at enabling them to compete for government tenders in the main, but to get them to do business on a broader business spectrum. The private sector should not be treated as it operates on a vacuum. It must also come to the party. Economic growth can and will never be sole responsibility of the government. The private sector must come to the party and assist the government in its plans. As we're talking with Prof Mohale, there are so many things you're doing and where the private sector assists in terms of making sure that they eradicate this unemployment. We're also excited about the work being done towards a full implementation of African continental free trade with the aim of tearing down the barriers of trade on our continent. If we succeed in building a strong African continental trade and start relying on ourselves, we will in turn rid ourselves from unnecessary international bullying, external interference with our domestic issues. Tonight, we gathered here a norm, but faced with the serious task of critical assessing the SONA with top industry leaders. The idea is to unpack so that we understand what it entails economic-wise, government-wise, and as well political-wise. Our esteemed guest, will share our wisdom with us in this regard. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my esteemed honor and pleasure to welcome you tonight in this SONA dialogue, which was made possible by the partnership with the Henley Business School. Thank you very much. And also Alexander Forbes. Thank you very much. The partnership we appreciate so much. And by that, we're saying we thank you and we thank you all. Let's enjoy the dialogue.
Thank you, President. One thing I have noted from your speech is an ethical leadership for an ethical nation. Before we continue, I would like to ask for 2 minutes. Oh, they're already doing it. Putting chairs on the left. It shows that, you know, as a nation, we are hungry for change. If the venue is too small. The venue is too small. Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, I would like to call upon a representative from Henley Business School, Andrew, to share insights on the importance of business leadership in shaping South Africa's economic future. Can we give him a round of applause? Thank you, Andrew.
Good evening once again, ladies and gentlemen. This is my second round of saying good welcome. That's a very long title, Wendy, but I appreciate it of the setup for my speech. More or less, it is rather about the partnership that we have ventured on with the BMF. And I want to thank you and welcome everybody to this. We're looking forward to the growth of our partnership together and the impact that we can make. Tonight is about dialogue, but also it's about the action that we take after this and the implementation of dialogue. I don't think we need to actually talk about the number of challenges that our world, our continent, and Africa is facing. We all know that. As a person in sales, I am the head of sales for business, the Henley Business School Africa. I always look at it as a half glass full type person. And when I hear the word challenge, it's very much about opportunity. And if I can implore us as a group that perhaps we take something back from the United States, who used to be called the land of opportunity, I fully believe that South Africa and this continent is the land of opportunity. Not only from the potential of our people, of the soil, but the intentionality that we have in the world. And I think tonight is an indicator that for business leaders to make a difference in the world around us. We've seen the implications of the economy. We've seen the implications of global geopolitics. The reality is, as an entrepreneur, I have an opportunity to make a difference. As a global multinational corporation CEO, I have a responsibility to make a difference in the lives of the people around us. And partnerships like this, we are so excited to be part of, so thank you. The opportunity that we face is one that over the next 20, 30 years is going to define the culture that we have, not only in South Africa, but as a continent. And we have that opportunity to decide what role we play in that. And ultimately, it is up to each and every single one of us. Our purpose in Henley Business School is we grow the people who grow the businesses that grow Africa. So it's fundamental to us that nights like this are so important. It's about the dialogue. It's about having, as leaders, the tough conversations that we need to have in a loving space. That we speak from the same page. We have different opinions and different ideas and different thoughts, but our strength is in our diversity of thought. And without that voice, we will never reach that potential that we have. So I'm incredibly excited to hear the conversation tonight. I encourage every single person not to just listen to the stage, but to have your voice, have that dialogue. And then when we leave tonight, to go back and implement action. So on behalf of Henley Business School, we have a very big welcome to you. And we are incredibly excited to see the dialogue and the implementation that happens after this tonight. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Andrew. I have a love relationship with Henley Business School. I'm yet to be a student here. Many years ago, I wrote in my vision board to do an MBA at Henley Business School. So this is me putting in an application for bursary. I got the opportunity to do that today. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Andrew, for that partnership. We cannot move the country forward without partnerships such as yours, and also partnerships together with Alexander Forbes, ensure that we drive the transformation agenda forward. Ladies and gentlemen, we get to the key topic for the day. President Cyril Ramaphosa delivered the 2025 State of the Nation address on February 6, 2025, under the theme, "A Nation That Works for All." The address outlined key policy objectives and highlighted significant achievements, which some of them are the second wave of economic reforms, where the president announced a series of reforms aimed at boosting economic growth above 3%. This includes enhancing the performance of state-owned enterprises like Eskom, Transnet, and substantial investment for infrastructure. Part of those initiatives included infrastructure investment, where the president announced a 940 billion in infrastructure projects, with 375 billion allocated to state-owned enterprises. In addition to that, for the first time in a democratic South Africa, the SONA was delivered under a government of national unity, reflecting a collaborative approach to national challenges. To help us navigate some of the questions that we're asking as BMF, is it addressing our critical challenges as a nation? Some finding it uninspiring, and some wishing that it addressed more our internal issues than looking at external investment. To help us navigate these questions, we have an exceptional panel of experts who will bring clarity, challenge assumptions, and offer solutions. This is not just a dialogue. It's an opportunity for us to co-create South Africa's future in a world that is anything but predictable. So let's get into it. I will invite at this stage our first panelist, Professor Bonang Mohale, who will share with us on the leadership, ethical leadership and governance. Professor Bonang Mohale is a distinguished South African businessman and leader. He serves as a Chancellor of the University of the Free State and is a Professor of Practice at the Johannesburg Business School's College of Business and Economics. He holds chairmanships at the Bidvest Group Limited and SBV Services. Prof. Mohale is also a member of the community of chairpersons of the World Economic Forum. He is also the author of the best-selling books, Lift as You Rise and Behold the Turtle. In 2023, he was recognized among the 100 most reputable Africans by Reputation Poll International. At this stage, Prof, I would like to call upon you to join us. Our second, yes, sir. Our second panelist is Mpho Malopyane from Alexander Forbes. She is a chief economist at Alex Forbes, a position she assumed on December 1st, 2023. In this role, she is responsible for formulating the company's macroeconomic strategy, identifying significant economic opportunities, and enhancing investment processes. Prior to joining Alex Forbes, Mpho Malopyane served as a senior economist at ABSA, where she led economic research for various African economies. She has also held position at Rand Merchant Bank and the National Treasury and Standard Bank. Would you kindly join us? Our third panelist is Dr. Rutendo Hwindingwi. I was told it's not Hwindingwi, it's Hwindingwi. He is the he's the chief advisor and founder of the Tribe Africa Advisory, a boutique firm that enhances the capability of organizations to conduct business successfully on the African continent. He has served over 25 years, over 25 years experience in the technology consulting industry, having held leadership roles such as African Regional Director for Elevate and Associate Director at Deloitte Africa. Dr. Hwindingwi is also an accomplished author and speaker known for his insights into doing business in Africa. As mentioned, that for the first time, in South African history, the State of the Nation address was delivered and Mpho Malopyane under the government of national unity, which symbolized a united nation, creating an equitable future for all. Would you say this is the reality? Some of the questions that we wish to address in this dialogue is the government of national unity, the GNU, comprised on key economic transformation policies? How can South Africa balance stability with decisive economic action? And some of the questions that we would also like to address in this dialogue under the banner of economic transformation and private sector accountability. There's a sentiment that SONA failed to emphasize on triple BEE and transformation. What mechanisms should be in place to hold the private sector accountable for transformation, skills development, and employment equity? Under the banner of public confidence and the road to 2026, did SONA do enough to restore public confidence in the government's economic agenda? So the key topic for discussions is coalition and governance and its impact on economic stability, the fiscal policy, investment climate, and business confidence post-SONA, South Africa's role in regional conflicts and global economic shifts, public trust in governance, and the road to 2026 elections. And I remember the president saying in his speech, we will not be bullied. And with that, Professor Mohale, I would like if you can share your insights on the first point.
So the short answer to your question is no. Especially because we are having this conversation at an epic moment, 35 years since the release of our first democratically elected president, Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela, who formed a government of national unity because we were a people that was traumatized. The white world did not know anything about the black world. And therefore there was a need to bring the two worlds together. Government of national unity presupposes an existential crisis. What happened on the 29th of May was not an existential crisis. It was our once wonderful movement, the African National Congress, being humiliated, having squandered a God-given opportunity to come into power to do only two things, really. improve the quality of lives of the majority of our people, and a better life for all, not just for elected officials. Gave us a 2/3 majority. Hands over seamlessly to President Thabo Mbeki, who then gives us 72.9%. He could have changed the constitution if he wanted to, but we chose not to. So what happened now, and we use these words interchangeably, GANU and coalition. You see, as Africans, to act clearly, we must speak clearly because we think clearly. This is a coalition with the DA. The others were roped in just to legitimize it and to give it a name that President Rolihlahla Nelson Mandela invented. Because the politicians have figured it out. When you say Mandela, we are meek and quiet and we smile. Two questions that we must ask ourselves. The first is, what is it that the ANC can do in a coalition with the DA that it failed to do in the 31 years of its absolute majority? That's 64%. They can change the constitution if they want to. But what did we choose? We chose our oppressors, colonizers, and racists who have no demonstrable track record of having collaborated with anybody or anything, who don't agree with us on anything, who will violently oppose the Bella Bill, not just NHI, but one of the 30 fundamental human rights, which is universal and equitable access to healthcare. The people whose strategy stated and on paper is the implosion of the ANC, who dared to look around and found 3 of our black brothers and sisters and said, we want to give the leadership position of the DA to you to bring us the black votes like cannon fodder, were humiliated in front of us when it was deemed that they want to go back to a liberal agenda. So for black people who are my niece and nephews, uncles and aunts, if you celebrate, there must be something wrong with you.
Would you then say that the GNU failed to be formed on the premise, or rather on the economic transformation policies?
It's called a coalition with the DA, not the GNU. Because we are at a business school. We are taught that structure follows strategy. Our strategy as a people with great natural endowments, who have collectively, including myself, have not succeeded in eradicating the legacy of apartheid, should have started by saying, what are the 4 or 5 things that we can agree with as a people? And those are not very difficult. Number 1 on that list, it has to be transformation, even though it's less fashionable to talk about it, because this economy must look like us. Number 2 must be ethical leadership. Number 3 must be good governance. Because when there's good governance, you can't steal from your own people, especially the young, sick, and dying. Number 4 has to be service delivery. Because in our 198 chapters of the Constitution, 195 is the job description of the politicians, which is service delivery. The last one is about law and order, safety and security. Because without law and order, safety and security, who are we and what are we? South Africans are not safe. I can understand when they walk on the streets because they're exposed. But they're not safe sleeping in their homes, which is supposed to be their castle. Because that's where the most violent crimes have increased in the last 15 years.
Thank you for that. Mpho? On economic transformation and private sector accountability, the president shared in his State of the Nation address the infrastructure programs, the revitalization of state-owned entities. When it comes to the microeconomics, pardon me. When it comes to the economic commitments outlined in the SONA, where do you see the biggest gaps between policy and execution?
Thanks for the question. Hopefully I'll be able to follow from the opening remarks of Prof. Mohale. That was quite enlightening. So for me, the SONA over the years, I think for my past sins in life, I'm an economist, and with that comes following the SONA each and every year. And for me personally, the SONA has been disappointing year after year. I always dread SONA time because it has become this laundry list of aspirations, which just gets reiterated over and over again. And there's never any follow through to say, these were the priorities. Last year, we are 60% halfway here, we are 20% halfway there. It's just a reiteration of policies that we want to aspire, targets that we want to achieve. And, I think the key difference this year, and I guess last year as well, is that there has been a refocus of policy aspirations and priorities. I want to shy away from saying policy priorities because if we know these are the policy priorities, then implementation should also be clear. But SONA is never clear on implementation. And, you know, right off the heels of SONA, we have budget next week. And sometimes the two don't even speak to each other. You know, just one example last year in particular, you know, NHI is always mentioned. NHI was mentioned again this year in the SONA, but at budget, if you looked at the actual budget book, there was no NHI funding allocation in there. So what are the policy priorities? You know, is NHI a policy priorities of government or is it not? If it is, why is there no funding allocation to it? So for me, the SONA over the years has become very disappointing. It's just a laundry list of, you know, aspirations. But I think what was interesting this year in particular was that there has been a reiteration of some focus areas, you know, particularly around the infrastructure fund that also followed from last year's budget as well, particularly the October budget. So there was already talks around we need to revitalize the economy, and we can do that by you know, investing in infrastructure. There was also talks around a capable state, you know, having a capable state, and that also followed through from Operation Vulindlela. So, you know, one, at least we can start to be slightly encouraged to say that, okay, there is at least some consistency. You know, there is at least some consistency in terms of what we're focusing on as a country, which is important because, you know, if we have key focus areas, then various stakeholders can then work together to achieve those focus areas. But SONA is always light on implementation. And that's why year after year, we are always kicking the can down the road. You know, in there also mentioned, I mean, I think the usuals were mentioned, a capable state, as well as reforming network industries to bring in private sector participation. There was also then another mention of, you know, what seemed to be trying to have a SONA that appeals to everyone, right? And which has become sort of the presidents of Cyril Ramaphosa trying to appeal to the whole population, trying to appeal to the ordinary South African citizens, trying to appeal to the business sector, and also trying to appeal to international investors. So you always get that middle of the road, you know, type of address. So the other laundry list of things in there was, you know, the usual NHI transformation. There was also mention about reforming the public sector, as well as digitizing, you know, identities, as well as visas. So, you know, it's then, okay, but, you know, you then reflect back, you know, to like, I don't know if you guys would recall Malusi Gigaba's 9-point plan. It's the same policies, like literally, it's the same policies that we've been talking about for years. And where's implementation? Where are we with the implementation? You know, where are we not getting things right? And unfortunately, that's the disappointment with SONA, always lacking on implementation details.
How do we bridge the gap between the policies and implementation, and what structures there to ensure that there's follow through from 2024 and 2025? We can see progress in what you have said, President, the year previous to what has been said in the following year.
I think firstly, to start with accountability, we need clear targets, right? Okay, so you're saying an NHI is a policy priority. What exactly with NHI do you want to achieve, and by when? You know, so it needs to start from there, and that's when we can then be able to hold government accountable, and also who's then responsible for spearheading that. You know, we can then have those forums to then hold, you know, is it the Minister of Health who's responsible for ensuring those targets? There also needs to be alignment within the budget, right? So if we're saying that we want universal healthcare for everyone, how are we going to get there? You know, how much is it going to require in funding? I think the last funding model which was done for NHI, I think it was still back at the National Treasury, or it was even before my time at the National Treasury. And there hasn't been any new costing done. So how are we then going to implement this policy if we don't even know how much is it going to cost us, you know, over what years? So there needs to be that, we need to be very visible around, you know, these are the policy priorities and this is, you know, by when we want to achieve this. And then we need to have people responsible for achieving that we can then hold accountable.
Mm-hmm. President mentioned, or rather acknowledged, the recent power outages, but assured that strides are being made against rolling blackouts, and emphasizing that energy action plans is starting to yield positive results. Can South Africa afford to comply with the just energy transition commitments while facing economic stagnation?
I think the route to net zero just transition really needs to be calibrated in such a manner that it does not disrupt South African communities, in such a manner that it also does not disrupt, you know, the various industries that are heavily reliant on the energy sector. And you know, when you follow the just a transition discussion, you can see that there are proponents. They say that this needs to be well thought out. It cannot just be an overnight overhaul. We also need to take into account the disruptions that are going to be caused in the communities where, for instance, coal mines need to be closed, because there are whole communities that are formed based on those coal mines. You know, people are employed in those in those coal mines. You then have small businesses that also service the people that work in those coal mines. So when you then say that we have to decommission this coal mine, what's then going to happen to that community? You know, there has been suggestions around, okay, maybe we put solar panels or we put windmills, but windmills don't require the same amount of headcount, the same amount of workforce.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we then balance that? So the just transition needs to happen, taking that into account to say, what's going to happen to the communities that are displaced? What other opportunities are going to be available to them? And, you know, that's very important, because we now are facing a situation where Gauteng and, you know, Joburg in particular is the major economic hub. And there's a shortage of housing, there's a shortage of development, because everybody is trying to come here for job opportunities. So the consequences of then displacing those communities is going to lead to a further influx into Joburg, which, you know, already is struggling with the housing crisis.
Sure. How do we balance foreign direct investment with national economic sovereignty? Has the government placed so much reliance or emphasis on foreign investment instead of stimulating domestic economic resilience?
And I think the issue of fiscal policy is always quite an interesting one, right? Because, you know, on the one hand, as a nation, we are living beyond our means. If you just look at the budget numbers, the headline budget numbers, we have a budget deficit, which means we spend more than we collect in tax revenue. At the same time, to supplement that deficit, we have borrowed heavily over the past decade. Our debt to GDP is quite excessive. But when you then look at where that money has went to, it has not went into productive investment. And that's why we have not been able to grow the economy. And that's why we're only talking about 1.5% GDP growth for 2025, which is way below the population growth, right? So when government, because we are living beyond our means, government has now had to be reliant on foreign direct investment, because we need to plug that gap. If you are living beyond your means, you either go to a bank to borrow money to supplement your income. In South Africa's case, we've had to look towards foreign direct investment or, even portfolio flows to supplement that deficit. So hence you're then finding a situation where you then have to balance the interest of, people giving you money to supplement your deficit as well as your national interest. What government needs to do is to rethink the way we tackle the budget or the way we approach the budget. What's in South Africa's best interest? How much is actually going towards the developmental budget? And I guess in that context, it is encouraging that in the SONA we are talking about this infrastructure spending, because that's what's going to get the economy growing. That's what's going to drive higher tax revenue and lift us out of this deficit environment that we have been living in.
Let me give an opportunity to Dr. Rutendo. Thank you, Mef. With the 900 billion infrastructure investment, which was long overdue, how can we ensure its effective execution, Doc?
Thank you, Wendy. And, it's always a hard act to follow when you have Professor first speaking, because he's always passionate about ethics. Now you know that you can't lie. And then you have an economist following suit. And on my left, a good colleague of mine, Patrick Kulati, who's CEO of a governance company. So now I have to speak the truth because... But coming with regards to delivery of infrastructure, it's a conundrum because, the reality is, one of the big things about AFCFTA, which speaks to the South African context, is first and foremost, it's the free movement of people and goods, whether across borders or in country, because you can't worry about crossing borders when, charity begins at home. So you have to fix things. So from an infrastructure perspective, the 900 billion, I'm not an economist, but that's a lot of money in rand terms. Have we got the capability? Have we got the need? We definitely have the need. And if you look at the biggest challenge, what is obviously transit and the dilemma that's happening there. So from an infrastructure perspective, roads, rail, shipping ports, the aviation port, all of those need to be upgraded, not only for the sake of economic growth and stabilization, but also to attract foreign direct investment. Because if people are going to invest in South Africa, they need to know that whatever they produce has to either be able to leave the country smoothly or come into the country smoothly. And the sad thing is that if you look at where South Africa is, and I think last year was our worst year from a Transnet perspective. It's an SOE. We knew that the congestion that was happening at the ports because of the challenges that were happening with the railroad, et cetera, et cetera. So with regard to, I don't think there's a shortage of money when it comes to infrastructure money. And I think as professors clearly outlined, the challenge that we have is that money getting to the right people in the right areas to deliver the right things. That's the challenge. We're not a broke country. When you look at Africa, 50% of Africa's GDP is in 4 countries. We're 54 countries, but 4 countries. Those 4 countries hold 50% of Africa's GDP. Can you guys hear me without this? Can you hear me without this? You can't. Okay, the mic is making a bit of a sound. But you're okay. Thank you, brother. I feel you. Okay, this is much better. Now I feel I can go and win a Grammy Award. So the point I'm trying to highlight is that we're one of the powerhouses in Africa. When you say which are 15% of Africa's economy we've got, that's $400 billion. So we're not weak, we're not broke. Trust me, I'm from Zimbabwe. I know what broke means. You ain't broke. So the issue is not that there's a lack of money. The issue is that there's a weakness in accountability, there's a weakness in governance, which ultimately, outlies in terms of the fact of the infrastructure, roads, and ports, and facilities are not built. So if we overcome that from a governance and accountability, yes, we've made progress, and we can do it. We actually have got some of the best infrastructure in Africa. I've opened up offices in Nigeria. I've opened up in Kenya. I've done business in over 20 African countries. The facilities we've got here are great. Do they meet the needs? No. Can more be done? Definitely. but it all boils down to the leadership and accountability, both in the private and public sector. Please, let's not kid ourselves. It's not just a public sector problem. For a bribe to go, a transaction, it's debit and credit. My accounts was bad at school, but where there's a debit, there has to be a credit.
Yeah.
So when bribes are debiting on the government side, where is the credit coming from? And so it's a responsibility, and why organizations like the BMF play a critical role, because you guys are leaders, and it ultimately belongs to leaders. So that's how I would summarize it, Madam.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Dr. Rutendo, with the shift in global alliances, BRIC expansion, Africa Free Trade Area, US tensions, we will not be bullied. How should South Africa position itself to maximize economic and diplomatic gains?
Okay, so, I think Andrew, when he was here, he talked about the half glass full, half glass empty. And I'm going to talk in that perspective because I call myself an African realist. I'm very optimistic about Africa, but I'm realistic also with regards to what has to be done. I'm just going to throw one or two stats and give context because, as my economist friend will tell you, numbers give reality to the situation. But before I outlay that, I'm just going to say a statement. I want you to ponder because this is an academic institution as well. Just ponder in the hindsight. I'm actually going to scare with this statement. In this last week, one of the most divisive statements was said by the US with regards to the whole Land Expropriation Act. We all together? I want you to think if that statement was done pre-GNU, when EFF was at the peak of its intensity, when DA was at the peak of its intensity, when ANC was where it was, how would have South Africa reacted? I want you to keep that at the back of your mind. If what was said by the United States president pre-GNU, where and how would South African reacted? I'll put a pause there. I'm going to throw some stats and just bear with me. I'll be short and sweet, but will give context. Africa's GDP is 3.1 trillion. The US GDP is 30 trillion. It's 10 times the size of Africa's GDP. South Africa's two greatest trading partners are China and the US. And the reason I'm saying this, I'm just picking up from Ed Kids-Vita. He's got a simple theory. There's geopolitics, there's geoeconomics. I'm shying away from the geopolitics, I'm going to geoeconomics because that's the reality. That's the pap and vos that we eat. Ne? We're together. Right, I'll continue with the stats. What China trades with the US on an annual basis is the size of South Africa's GDP. The average trade value between those two countries is 400 billion US dollars. Our GDP is for about 400 billion US dollars. So let's not kid ourselves. In terms of economic impact to the US, we are small. Are we together? I'm not saying this to disharmonize you. Some of you are beginning to look at me with MK. I'm going to a Okay. It's just a sense check. Okay. Coming to AGOA, we export about 6 billion US dollars to the US on an annual basis. We import about 3 billion US dollars. However, and the economists can confirm this, AGOA is about 6,700 trade product lines. We're only utilizing about 25% of those. But even on that 25%, our increase over the past 10 years in terms of exporting to the US has actually gone down on the AGOA items. What has actually increased is actually the non-AGOA product lines. So if you speak to economists, not to the politicians, and I'll get to the political part, I'm not a politician, they'll actually tell you from an economic impact perspective, when you look at economics, if AGOA gets out of the picture, the guys who really suffer in the country are probably the automobile manufacturing guys. But from an economic perspective, it's not huge. I'm saying what the economists have said, right? You better repeat what I say. Okay, my last statistic, Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. His Excellency Wamkele, at the moment, we're probably intercontinental trade is about 190 billion. The vision is in the next, for Africa, which is 16% of our trade value. The vision in the next 5 or 10 years, they want to increase that by 10%. The EU bloc is about 55%, no, it's about 60%. The US bloc, and now with the Gulf of America, which has been rebaptized, is probably about 50%, and then Asia is also the average between those two. The intercontinental trade agreement, trade is about 190 billion at the moment. South Africa contributes 20% of Africa's intercontinental trade. The next country that contributes even close to us is on the 10% mark. Southern Africa, because of South Africa, contributes 40% of the intercontinental trade on the African continent. So ladies and gentlemen, if South Africa, and bear in mind, we are one of the top 5 performing economies. We always toggle between Nigeria and South Africa, so it's one on the top 2. So what I'm trying to say is that from a geopolitics coming down to geoeconomics and looking at the reality on the ground, from a political perspective, we need to sort as much as possible our relationship with the US. First prize. We have to, because we live in a political world. But you have to think of a backup, because the current leadership of the US has got they're binary coded. It's a yes or no. They'll either love us or they hate us. If they'll hate us, we have to still think of a backup plan. And the reason I've given you all these stats from a contextual perspective, highlighting the risks, but also highlighting where South Africa is strong and capable. And the question is, if in any strategy, one option fails, what is your backup plan? So from a South Africa perspective, the other responsibility, and I'll end with this, that Africa has, is that if South Africa goes belly up.
Oh, she's in a meeting.
Okay.
Amanda.
I planned that, by the way. South Africa go. I should be on Hollywood. But to end with this, if South Africa does go belly up, the consequences for the rest of Africa will be actually significant. So if I was an African president and I was sincere with seeing the intercontinental trade agreement and all those other initiatives working, and I realized that 20%, if not even 40% of that intercontinental trade agreement is based on South Africa, I would make Ubuntu reality. I would say, guys, and I'm thinking as a Pan-Africanist, guys, if South Africa goes belly up, there are other words to describe it, we are in hot soup. What can we do? So I'm getting to the M23 conflict in Rwanda, DRC, and all those places. The mature thing is, for the sake of Africa, South Africa actually has to come right. It has to sort out these internal mess, that goes without saying. But parallel to that, we have to sort out and support these guys to sort out the bigger problem from a geopolitics. Let me pause there, because I know I'm talking too much. I didn't go to church on Sunday, so I'm full to sit.
You said a mouthful, Anil said. You said a mouthful, Doc. I'm told that there are questions online, and also we can open questions from the floor. There's already a question over there. Okay. Is there someone who will help me with the mic?
Good evening, everyone. I don't need to stand up, do I? I do. Oh, okay. Morning, evening, everyone. Sichava. So I have a question for each and every one of the panelists, and thank you for your discussions, pointers. The first one, Rutendo Hwindingwi, my question would be, what struck me from what you were discussing is, number one, the fatherless kids in this nation. And not fatherless from a point of they've passed on, but they're not present. So I wanted to know, what is the responsibility of, firstly, the Black household, and secondly, the South African household in the issues that we have in this country? Because I think as much as we focus on the bigger picture, it's about what's happening at home. I think we're a country that can't decide on what we want. Everyone knows what they want, but not what we want. So from the household basis, that's my question. And then to the economist, my question would be, it's been a long time since Mr. Anikulapu Puti passed on, right? But one of his songs, he says, they will set up inquiries, and all the money is missing, announcements will happen. Those are his lyrics, and an inquiry was set. It's public. You can read how much money it is stated has been recovered. Where does the ordinary citizen go to verify if actually that money was recovered? Because it is the people's money, after all. So yeah, that's my question. And then Doctor, yeah, it's a fundamental question on my side. I mean, it's if you were to describe in a paragraph what is business in Africa, and based on your experience, what does the Black child need to navigate business in Africa, honestly and practically? I know we talk about borders and we talk about all those things, but for someone who's starting their business or has already started their business and has come across the need for, let's oil each other's hands. Let's speak on my request is to speak on those matters, to say, what is it that you actually need? What are the challenges we are going to face? These are the practical measures for you to combat those challenges.
Thank you.
Hello? Hello?
So, statistically, let me start by doing some crude arithmetic, not mathematics. So if the interest rate is 8% and inflation is 4%, it stands to reason that the GDP growth must be at least 4%. Because if it's not, you're going backwards. Today, we are a 400 billion US dollar economy. Number one. We were number one before 2010. We lost it to Nigeria. Egypt was number two. But it's the same 400 billion it was in 2016. So when you measure our discretionary purchasing power, we have gone backwards. South Africans are poorer today compared to 10 years ago. And yet when you do the math, Edward Kitzvetter at SARS, this year ended 29th of February, he banked 2 trillion South African rands. It's almost the same as the value of the PIC. Therefore, proving beyond any shadow of doubt that South Africa is not a poor country, just poorly. I think we need to solve the things that are keeping us awake at night. I'm not a politician, so we don't have a triple problem. We have one problem. It's the stubbornly high levels of unemployment, which then lead to increasing levels of poverty and then increasing levels of inequality. State of the Nation address comes up with more than 20 priorities, more than 20. We love Russia when it suits us. But the central command in Russia, there's not one single solitary person who sits there who doesn't have a university degree. Not one. In KwaZulu-Natal, we have 127 local government officials who can read or write. We have 257 municipalities. Only 58 of them had clean audits from the Auditor General. Only a third of them work. The other third is okay. The last third is totally dysfunctional. Mandela's GNU had only 30 cabinet ministers. GNU. The coalition with the DA has 76. more deputy ministers than the ministers themselves. And yet we know that deputy ministers actually don't do much, because there's never been a situation in this country in 31 years where you are a deputy minister of health and the minister of health doesn't wake up in the morning or gets promoted. The deputy takes over. It's never happened. So why do we need deputies? Let me end with just two anecdotes. So the first, because we love China. China doesn't have 21 priorities. It has one priority. It's called a 1.4 billion people problem. That's all it is. It doesn't matter how many minerals you've got, how big they are, if you're not helping China to solve a 1.4 billion people problem, they are not interested in you. And therefore it informs China's national strategic vision, but it also informs China's foreign policy. 1.4 billion people. So when we say come and build Tanzara, Lesotho National Development Corporation, or a steel factory in Zimbabwe, they bring their own people. Because that's what they're solving. Singapore, it's another one. Lee Kuan Yew gets expelled by his parent, Malaysia, because it's a hopeless backward. He looks at his people and says, we are on our own. What are we going to do? He didn't come up with 21 priorities. He said, let's do three things. Number one, meritocracy. Number two is pragmatism. Number three, honesty. In 40 years, Singapore became one of the top 5 highest per capita economies in the world. In 2050, it will be number 1. It has already exceeded Hong Kong in terms of just real estate. Just those 3 things.
The answer to your question around where that money flows, it's supposed to flow back into the fiscus, into the whole government revenue pool. But what you often find is this tends to be a long process behind it. So like, for instance, when they, they'll say, so-and-so was accused of corruption, we've frozen their assets, we have recouped this much back. And unfortunately, that tends to be in hard assets, fixed assets. It's not necessarily cash. So when it then flows into the fiscus, into the government revenue, it tends to be in trickles. And that's why you don't immediately see it, because firstly, those assets need to be auctioned, they need to be sold, and then only then it can then flow into the fiscus. Personally, I also haven't paid attention to that particular line item, but I can definitely start paying more attention to it and get back to you on more information in terms of, since the state capture inquiry, how much has actually flown back into the fiscus, but it is supposed to flow back into the overall government revenue pool.
Okay, your question was around young people in terms of, what is the right thing to tell them or advise them in Africa now. So it's actually pertinent, because I'll use my son as an example. Don't tell him I did this, but he's not here. He's in second year at university. When he went into first year, when these guys come out of matric, they think they've achieved it. And I wanted to give him reality. And I said, I said it a more tender way, but I'll share you with these stats because it gives, again, reality in terms of check. Africa, and I hate talking about Africa homogeneously, but you have to start from somewhere, because the solutions are always not clear-cut, the country per country, but just to give you context. Africa every year, in terms of youth, 15 to 24-year brackets, if you look at the UN figures, UNESCO, etc., we produce about 15 million people into the employment market. TVT, universities, etc., coming into the unemployment market because they're not employed. But over and above that, we've already have an average unemployment quantum of about 13 to 15 million already existing. So every year, we're pumping out 15 million, but we've already got 13 million people, young people, unemployed. You and I are not young, just for the record, ne? Okay. But Africa is only producing on average, about 4 million jobs per year. Can you see the quantum difference? Okay. The last stat, and I'll bring it together. Africa's GDP is 3% of global GDP. So in other words, 97% of the wealth of the world is outside Africa. One of South Africa's strengths right now, one of the growing areas exceeding all of the other African countries, we're becoming an outsourcing destination. In other words, there's a growth of multinationals investing in getting services out of South Africans based here. Could be digital, could be telephonic, call centers, etc., etc. So why am I saying this? We are kidding ourselves if we're going to solve the unemployment problem by only focusing in terms of creating jobs in Africa to satisfy the African demand. The quantum is too big. Are we agreed? We can have entrepreneurs. Tomorrow I can be entrepreneur. I can get my son to be entrepreneur. But we actually have to position, and we can't just put these on the kids, on the young people. We actually have to position both the kids and governments and private sector to skill our people to be able to give global services without necessarily leaving the continent. And coming back, a brilliant example of this is China. That whole one priority thing, and one professor, you stole the data from my head. I think you were fishing. I'm just putting it out there. But he said it point blank. China realized we've got a population of 1.4 billion. Which continent has a population of 1.4 billion? But they realized there is no way we can satisfy the demand of skill to jobs by only, and remember, China is entrepreneurial. They've done everything, industrialization, everything. There is no way we can do it by just focusing on the local demand. We actually have to skill people so that a person in China can go to Karangua and build a toilet and be paid by Karangua. That's their mindset. So when China goes global, I mean, if you look at Huawei, Huawei, you guys know Huawei. Hey, my Zoom SONA is coming out now. Do you know that the cell phone for Huawei, when they built it, it wasn't targeted to compete with Nokia, to compete with Motorola. They designed it to compete and be a solution for a go-go in the rural areas of China. They made it so basic, but they said, let us think of solving a $1.4 billion problem. Then soon after they capitalized China, they then went to India and Russia, emerging markets. They were not worried about the US. By the time they came to Africa and America had woken up, when they said, let's make it more advanced. So I think what I'm talking about, in terms of resolving the problem with regards to unemployment, yes, we have to do all the fundamentals, country responsibility, legislation, policy. But our mindset, we must realize that if we're going to grow as a continent, country by country, and create wealth, there is 97% of global wealth out there. And we need to position ourselves with our skills and our education and our capacity building to tap into that. If we have that mindset, it's a different kind of mindset opposed to saying, let's fight. That's why we have so many coups in Africa. We're slicing around for the 3% of global GDP. Where 97% of the wealth is out there. And that's where the opportunity is. And that for me is that mindset, obviously with the practicalities, with policy, with private and public sector working together is a key solution to that.
We have some. We have some questions online. I see they are getting a little bit impatient. Okay.
Yes, who's online saying greeting? Can you ask your question, please?
Hello, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, yes, I have only two questions. I will direct one to Prof. Prof, for over 30 years, and now we've had this a problem of corruption. I mean, the ANC government has had 30 years to really improve the people's lives. We have a problem of corruption, no accountability in state institutions, Eskom, Transnet, and so on. And you've said that you don't see hope with this, the so-called quote-unquote GNU government. Who do you think is more capable in being a partner of the ANC? Because you have MK this side. Most of those people who are there are tainted in the state capture. do you see any hope in reviving our state institutions? Looking, you spoke about the cadre deployment, the illiteracy that is there in those people. You quoted KZN, the amount of illiteracy, people who can't read and write. Do you have any hope that our state institutions will improve whatsoever? And what is that hope? Who do you think is the partner in government, in all these political parties? What do you think is the solution? Because I don't think that will be solved anytime soon, even though I think with this, the so-called GNU and all these parties being connected together, there might be some kind of accountability. I don't see any solution right now. The last question, Doc. Can we afford to lose the US as a partner? I mean, of course, we lose PEPFAR and ALGOA, as you mentioned. Can we afford to lose the US as a partner? What would be the alternative? What are the consequences? What are you seeing there? I see people talking there and there. Of course, you talked about geopolitics and geoeconomics. Very interesting. What is in there for us? Thank you.
Program Director, before the panel responds, can I just add 2 more from online and then they can address them all?
Yes.
Thank you. So just piggybacking on Samgele's question, we have Don Andrews, and he says, as a G20 and African leader, how does South Africa challenge Trump's recent actions that threaten both global economic stability and the principles of shared humanity? And in another one from Anonymous, with about 600 US companies in South Africa, how will business position itself given US aid being withdrawn? Thank you.
Professor. So hope, I'm an eternal optimist. But it's Chief Albert Luthuli who reminds us that you don't want that even your most fiercest enemy at their weakest to exclude you as a solution. At what point we wake up in the morning when we have a choice to look right and say, we'll go to bed with the DA, but not with the MK and the EFF. When the DA is 22%. The rest is all the black parties. But these 3 in particular don't have an ideological rift. They are from the same womb. Therefore, it's easier to get into a room and talk about strategy and then structure, and then look amongst all of us and say, who then is best positioned to take our people to nirvana? And then we pick the appropriate leader. Because you see, you have to love your people to lead them. State Capture, 7 volumes. The first volume, 684, says there are 97 members of the African National Congress who have been called by name. Up until today, not a single successful prosecution. The same way that we put a Truth and Reconciliation Commission together, chaired by, amongst others, Emeritus Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and he cried. 300 that did not get an amnesty. 31 years into democracy, not a single successful prosecution. Let me end by saying, now we have people who have gone to their past masters to go and report us to their bosses, to say, no, they want to steal our land without compensation. And yet, the truth of the matter is that there's nothing that we have done in this land expropriation without compensation, which was not in the 1996 Constitution. Section 25, Article 3A, the 8th line from the bottom, it says, in the public interest, when conditions of fair and equitable have been adequately addressed, then compensation can be down to zero. But what we did was to be lazy to put the appropriate legislation to be able to execute on this. Because the people who call themselves our leaders were looking at other things, not at their people. And yet people died, they went to war because of land. During the presidency of Jacob Zuma, we buy a farm called Mala. The budget of the Department of Land, for a lack of a better word, is 1.2 trillion. They pay 980 billion buying one farm. Nkwinti was the minister that time. And then they say to this family, no, take your money and bank it, but don't spend it. We'll give you a contract to run the farm on behalf of these poor blacks, and we'll pay you 350,000 per month. So the intent was corruption, not to give people back their land. In Zondo Commission state capture says the first 5 years we lost 1.4 trillion South African rands to state capture. The 9 wasted years we lost just to the two families, 200 billion just to the two Zupta families. Imagine what we could have done.
Okay, so, and I'll ask you, Madam Economist, to support me whatever I say, because I'll need your help. So I'll just touch on, I've even forgotten his question, but I think it was, what did he ask? I remember the one from the writing in terms of AGOA, can we afford, oh yeah, that was it. He said, Doc, okay, he said, can we afford to lose America as a trading partner? Okay, going back to economics, let's take away the emotions away, okay, from a political perspective. It's our biggest trading partner. So the reality is that you want to keep them as a trading partner. Obviously, you don't want to compromise your values as a country, because what I like about Prof, he doesn't hold back. A lot of the ethical issues is highlighted. We have come too far in South Africa to go back to that level. But from a geo-economics perspective, ideally, you'd want to keep them as a trading partner. If they pull out, the reality is there won't be a trade vacuum. It's impossible. Somebody will have to fill it out. And the two guys that are waiting on the sidelines, waiting to open those bottles of champagne to celebrate if the US pulls out. And bear in mind, guys, now I'm selling this to you in secrecy because I'm on the American Chamber Subcommittee for Trade and Investment. So you mustn't tell them I told them. The reason I was giving you the stats and the influence we have as South Africa regionally, continentally, is because you leverage off your strengths. And if you think about it, if China and Russia, who are the biggest enemies from a trade perspective and political of the US, take advantage of Africa, and we are one of the biggest influencers, then we've got something we can leverage off. Whether he listens to us or not, that's why I'm saying think geoeconomic. So ideally, from a political perspective, let's do what we can. Ideally, we don't want to pull out. Coming to AGOA, I mean, I've talked about that in terms of the consequences. Coming to the whole USAID withdrawal. So if you guys thought you had a problem with NHI and debating in terms of whether you have money or not, USAID, remember the contribution they make, which is primarily PEPFAR, which is the HIV program, and a bit of just energy, the just energy transition, is $500 million US. Now, I'm not a smart mathematician, but if you say $500 million times 20, and then you think, as of last week, when the president went into the SONA, before the whole PEPFAR, before the whole USAID thing was put in a hold because of expropriation, when you look at the whole medical costs of HIV and maintaining it and supporting, that's $500 million, if Trump gets his way, wiped off the slate of the budget. So in other words, if he doesn't put that back in, we're going to have to look for plus or minus $500 million US to implement NHI. If that's not a complexity, then tell me what is. And I'll end with this. After all this emotion and all the crying and screaming, guys, one thing about Africa, it's always patient capital or patient strategy. Why do I say this? This guy's got 4 years. And sometimes we forget that. He's got 4 years. So we can be silly and argue as if we're arguing with a person who's going to be there for 20 years, or realize, gosh, and I'm now talking politics. This guy's got 4 years. He's already half a year gone. If you think about it, and remember, with presidential elections in the next 2 years, they're starting to look for his replacement. And he won't change the constitution. This is not Africa. You can't just change it by just going to Washington, D.C. So I'm trying to highlight, think geopolitically, think geoeconomics, but also be strategic and tactical. Because the battle out there requires, when you're talking about from a global perspective, you have to think all those angles. So I'll hand it back to you, man.
I mean, I think to also add some context there in terms of the numbers, if we look at, so firstly, our trade with the US, China is our largest trading partner. We export about 9% of, our total exports to the US. And if you then further break down that 9%, about 34% is precious metals. And in there is PGMs, platinum, palladium, right? And that's about 34%, right, of our total exports to the US. And that's important minerals for their automotive sector, right? So, where I'm going with this is that as South Africa, as the president correctly highlighted that, our foreign policy is that of non-alignment, and it's that of promoting human rights, peace and friendship, as well as fair trade and investment ties, right? So we shouldn't be, yes, the US is powerful, but we shouldn't be negotiating from a point of disadvantage, right? Yes, coup heads need to prevail, but we shouldn't regard US business as a aid towards South Africa. Most of the American companies operating in South Africa are not doing it because of charity. They're doing it because it makes business sense, right? So that's another thing that's important for us to keep in mind. So going back to our trade states, 34% is precious metals, important for the automotive sector. The Chinese are already giving them a run for their money, right? And then I think about 24% is actually AGOA trade, the trade preference. If we lose all that, that can be rerouted, as the doctor has indicated, it can be rerouted to other markets as well. And then when it comes to the issue of the aid we receive from the US is about 0.1% of our GDP. I think people always forget that South Africa is a 7 trillion. It's a 7 trillion economy, right? And most of that aid, 17%, yes, it goes towards funding the AIDS program, with the remaining 83% being funded by government. Our fiscus, yes, is already strained. We are going to have to look for those resources elsewhere. But we are now dealing with a president, US president, who's literally hell-bent on shaking up the world order, and aggressively so. He is also unstable, announces tariffs midnight, the following day, like you literally wake up to tariffs, you're trying to do analysis on the impact. By the time you go to bed, or the tariffs are lifted. Oh, geez, okay, I wasted the whole day trying to analyze that, right? So, we also need to understand that we are now dealing with, a very volatile presidency. I mean, the EU has come out, and I think it's the leading candidate in Germany, to say that the US is no longer an ally that we can look to, right? So the whole world is now realizing that everybody is on the firing block, and it's up to the rest of the world to decide how they're then going to approach this new US presidency. This morning, we woke up to the news that Trump has also repealed a law which disbarred US companies from engaging in bribery. So corruption is back on the table, right? And we're speaking about ethics. So we need to take all these things into context when we're going to be formulating a strategy with the US. the other thing as well, when we talk about foreign direct investment, our largest FDI flows actually come from Europe, both direct investment as well as portfolio flows. So people that buy our bonds and equities, the largest buyers are actually the UK. And then in terms of direct investment, the largest flows come from Europe. So, you know, a gun cannot be held to our head, but, you know, at the same time, it's important for Africa to stand up and craft its own strategy in terms of where they want to go. There is so much growth potential. If you just think about, you know, spatial disparities, just building rail lines, you know, just investing in infrastructure to transport people. Firstly, that's going to spur demand for our minerals. And we know that Africa is rich in minerals. We've been talking about localization as well as beneficiation. It was in the SONA as well. But what have we done over the years to actually localize and, you know, develop secondary industries? We haven't done anything. So I think, you know, yes, Trump is here and he's hell-bent on shaking up the world order, but is that direction that the world wants to go towards? Those are very important questions that our leaders need to then answer. And I think this is also why South Africa, in terms of the G20 presidency, this is why South Africa is also on the firing line, right? We are hosting the G20 presidency this year. And the one thing that, you know, South Africa for all its, what's the English word I'm looking for? You see now my data bundles have depleted. For all its arrogance in dealing with, you know, other African countries, we always invite them to the table, right? So we were a member of BRICS. We opened that door towards other African countries. We do hold positions in the UN General Assembly. We have opened up the door towards other African countries. We are now hosting the G20 presidents, and we are saying that this is a discussion about Africa. What strategy do we want to craft as Africa? And, you know, I think that is, you know, should be our plan B, to say that there is just so much potential. We have been, I mean, you know, analysts have been talking about Africa as the next growth engine. And it has just disappointed year after year. And I think it goes back to the issue of the type of leaders we are electing. Why are they in it for themselves?
I will take two more questions from the floor. We are running a bit behind in time. Just two more questions. There's a question at the back, and there's a question from the side.
Good evening to the panelists. So for me, I just sort of want to focus on the economics part of it. So there was a time, I think, in our democracy where we had around 4 to 5% economic growth. We had low debt levels, and we had low unemployment or reducing unemployment. So the question I want to ask the panelists is, what were we doing right back then? And I understand corruption and the impact it had, but in terms of policies, I'm pretty sure there was something we were doing right back then compared to what we're doing now, or yeah, after that. So that's the question one.
Thank you very much. Shoni from Alex Forbes. Doc, you touched on something that is very, very close to my heart, Ubuntu. As you spoke about Africa, that is what makes us who we are today. And I think that is, America speaks about the American dream. And I think it is important that we speak about Ubuntu as the African dream, which is not what we have. And I just want to bring this conversation to us this evening. We know what we know. Mpho speaks about the fact that there is a laundry list
year on year, year on year. And we know that. It doesn't seem as if much has changed. And the question that I have, I think it is, and I'm hoping that it will be answered by all of us, is as professionals today, what is our responsibility? Next year, we're going to come here again. Alex Forbes will be the sponsor, trust me. We know that. But it would be good for us to have a different conversation.
Yeah.
As professionals today, what is our role? We could have all the panels that are here. They've spoken absolutely brilliantly. And I think all of us are moved. But the question is, what's our next? What is our next in order to change the narrative of this country? I'm not speaking, 1976, we definitely know what happened. Some of us lost brothers into exile. But we knew when they came back, they had a sense of purpose. What is our purpose as the African child? We are divided among ourselves. It's not just about race anymore. There are cultural differences. When do we then formulate that African dream that gives us that sense of purpose and responsibility around how we change this country? It's no longer about me. It's about what we bequeath to our children. They don't see a future because of all the narrative and all the corruption. They don't see a future here anymore. They want themselves out. And it is our responsibility purely because we do not want to unite as an African child. And that is the charge that I'm actually bringing to our panelists, that from here, where to?
This is the last one.
Yes, you were waiting for me for this night. Evening, my name is Comfort Matuti. I am the provincial chair of the BMF Young Professionals. Thank you very much for the contributions made. And I think the answer, Prof, we can take with us tonight is that the next time SONA works is when we would have patched potholes and the street lights are working and the taxi drivers will be driving on their lane. If they don't, we arrest them. At the absence of that, we'll still have this series of questions why SONA is not working. Now, Prof, and maybe also the panel, in the midst of the 21 growing priorities that seems to be scattered and all over the place, we have a mandate to champion towards transformation. 31 years down the line, some achievements have been made. They are not enough. How do we navigate and find a niche in these scattered, unprioritized, seemingly priorities to ensure that the mandate of achieving transformation is foreseen in our lifetime? Thanks.
Good question from my side. And my question is to the doc, right? So I understand BRICS to be sort of a political formation, right? These people are friends, they meet once in a while and they laugh and all of that, right? But I'm trying to understand, why is it not a trading sort of formation? Why is there no economic agreements, right? Because, I mean, you've just mentioned there that America has went, or at least Trump in this case, went completely destabilized. And in the absence of Trump, what is the solution? Because we hear BRICS and we hear the scenario that, okay, we're part of BRICS and we very good friends with Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. And then the next day you hear that Trump is about to pull out and we could collapse, kind of thing. So I'm trying to understand, why is BRICS not a political, why is BRICS not an economic formation? And why is it only a political formation? But furthermore, why is it also not a military sort of formation, right? In the same way NATO is a military formation, because these guys want to attack us based on what the DN and so on are sort of taking overseas. But also furthermore, right? You speak about 4 years of Donald Trump. Don't you think with his current approval ratings, because his approval ratings are soaring, that there isn't an increase in sort of right-wing politics in America, that can see an Elon Musk succeeding and continue down the very same havoc that Donald Trump is continuing? So those are my questions.
Okay, so I'll answer the Ubuntu and that one. I think the local dilemmas with the harder questions, I'll let my colleagues, my honorable colleagues respond. Quickly on Ubuntu, for me, Ubuntu is powerful, but passion, Africa, I always say Africa, if passion was a currency, Africa, all of us would be billionaires because we've got passion, Ubuntu, come together, etc. But and it actually relates to what you're saying. But if we don't translate that into practical, pragmatic, economic initiatives, that's why I'm saying, for example, with all that's happening, this is the greatest reason for Africa to actually become united and said, guys, what are our strengths? We've had a journey of liberation wars. We've had a journey of fights and struggles, but as Africa, we've moved. And this is a chance for us to unite and think strategically about going forward. So Ubuntu, absolutely key. But if that kumbaya does not translate into practical, and that's why for me, FCFTA, even with where they are, it's a big thing. Because to get all those, with all that's happening in the Sahel region, East Africa, Mozambique, Angola, all that stuff, for the guys still to be moving, that's a big thing. So yes, we have to be united. And that translates to us as individuals contributing, etc. But it has to, it takes our leaders to translate it into practical things. With regards to BRICS, and I'm going to give you a non-economics answer because maybe my colleagues can bring the economics element. It's all built to Mula, Baba. That's what it is. The reason why BRICS from an ideology is brilliant. Emerging markets, Brazil, India, China, Russia, you've got all the big wigs. But what is the most powerful currency in the world right now? Well, the two of them. It's pound and US dollar. And you've excluded them. That's why the building of a BRICS bank. So our leaders, in terms of mindset, are actually in the right direction. Let's build a bank, our own currency. But that is a heavy, heavy lift. Until we have Mula that backs up a BRIC and can impact global, that we can go to an EU and say, here's a BRIC currency, consider in terms of buying bonds, use the BRIC currency. That's what if that's taken away, even military power has to be supported by financial power. So for me, I think if that comes into play, and to be honest, when you see President Trump saying, guys, if you go with the US, if you leave the US dollar, I'll come hell and thunder. It's out of fear. It is out of fear because they knew that if there is another currency out there that challenges the US dollar currency, then they're a backstop. And that's why it's actually out of fear. So that will be my reason in terms of from a BRICS perspective. Well, let me pause there because I'm honoring time and I'll hand over to my colleagues.
Also just briefly on the BRICS formation, right? And I hope I'm not gonna burst your bubble, but if we actually go back and look at the formation of BRICS, it wasn't the countries coming together. The acronym came up because of some Goldman Sachs trader who wanted to sell emerging market bonds because he wanted to make money. And then he came with the acronym. It had to be catchy, for people to catch up on it. And it was, identifying the next potential growth engines where investors can make money from investing in those bonds. So in terms of the BRICS, it also feels like it's more of a, figuring it out as we go, right? But at the same time, yes, the countries are quite powerful. They have large economies, potential for growth. But unfortunately, what you also have there is that the interest and aspirations of the various countries in the BRICS are not aligned. And you also have a situation there where you have China and India, which are neighbors and are not necessarily getting along, right? So you have all those dynamics as well that they have to maneuver, and that's why perhaps the BRICS nations have not come out to be this huge superpower, which is also going to challenge the issue of forming a common currency. I mean, Europe is still struggling with the final unification program that it's supposed to undertake, to just show you how difficult it is really to form economic blocks. Now, take that into account and the geographic location of the BRICS nations. there is a lot that they need to maneuver, but certainly if they do work together towards, common interests, they can emerge as the next superpower. And then the question around growth, when we had 4 to 5% growth, I think our electricity availability factor, the EAF, if you follow it, if you follow the whole load shedding, they'll be talking about it. At the time, it was around 80%. It averaged 80 to 90%. So we have sufficient electricity to power industries. You can't grow if you don't have electricity. Transnet as well was operating at peak performance. They were meeting their capacity. So the energy availability factor, the last time I looked at the figures for December, I think it had dropped again to around 50%. So that's the issue. We don't have electricity. There's a common phrase which is now being used, that South Africa is actually deindustrialized over the past couple of years. And that's why we've not been growing. In addition to that, we have not been putting money into infrastructure. I mean, just walk around Joburg. It's shocking. I mean, I have these memories when I was young, and I was with my mom in Pretoria, and the streets were clean, everything was well kept, buildings were well kept, but for some reason the ANC government didn't think it was worth putting money into maintaining as well as growing infrastructure. The last big infrastructure project we had was the Gautrain. And, that's also around the time when we were growing around 4 and 5%. So, those are the key issues. These supply side constraints, we need to sort out electricity. We need to sort out Transnet. We need to sort out water shortages. We need to sort out municipalities. We need to sort out the people that are running municipalities, because that's the bedrock of economic activity. That's where companies actually function and run. So if you can't get that right, you're not going to grow. And we also need to invest in infrastructure for us to reach those 4 to 5% growth rates. I'll leave the transformation question to Prof to close this one out for us.
Welcome. Kialibu. So what happened when we grew? So it was in October 2007. The highest we've ever grown is 5.4%. And it was during President Thabo Mbeki's time. Seamless handover from Mandela to him. We're at our height. He gave us 43 consecutive quarters of positive GDP growth. Why did we do that? Because we were spending money on infrastructure. So we are the one of only 2 countries in the world that has ever hosted the 3 World Cups. And when you do that and you spend on infrastructure, stuff happens. But unfortunately, we did other things. So during the 2010 World Cup, of course, we built new stadia, we renovated others 10 in total, but we spent 787 billion rand. That stimulates the economy. I think also what we need to do, we need to stop stealing. Because when you steal money, it gets finished. So we decide that electricity is important. And we built not 1, but 3 power stations simultaneously, concurrently, and in parallel. Medupi and Kusile, both budgeted at 150 billion. Should have been finished in 2016. We have spent more than 300 billion. Medupi has never given us 50% of its capacity, which is 9.6 gigawatt of electricity. Kusile, the same thing. I live in Gula because it's hydroelectric power. And the intent was not service delivery. It was looting.
Are they still talking?
Because then Chancellor House says, but will be a partner of Hitachi, who then make the boilers. So 20% of 150 billion is a lot, but 20% of 300 billion is even more significant. So there was a perverse incentive there. Tourism is the biggest forex earner in most economies.
I noted everybody.
The president celebrates that this year we're going to have 9 million visitors. But the rest of our tourists are land tourists from the rest of the continent. But we've got more than 5 entities whose job it is to promote tourism. South African Tourism, Brand SA, proudly South African, Tourism Business Council of South Africa, because we're doing exactly the same thing that we did. So we come into power, we know that everything was geared towards saving the 10%. Now we're going to add the other 90%. When you do that, what you do? It means you must double up. You must work harder. You must spend more money. But we stopped spending on electricity. I mean, Van der Bijl created this thing with 56 gigawatts of electricity. We are in power. We have never produced more than 37 gigawatts of electricity. The gap has always been at peak, and what we can produce is just 6 gigawatt. That's all it is, 6 gigawatt. But we had load shedding that lasted more than 15 years. So we need to give confidence to ourselves. So when we have a problem, we can solve it in about 5 years. We had 750 days of national lockdown during COVID-19, but we had 311 days where we said there is no load shedding. And then the 2 days came. But the 5 entities whose job it is to promote tourism, let me talk about SAT alone, tourism. 80% of their budget is to woo the Americans and the Europeans. But the people who come here and spend the most amount of money come from the rest of the continent. So we must be clear about who are the people we put as MDs and CEOs in the more than 734 state-owned entities and state-owned enterprises. Because if you put the wrong people, they'll use these entities as a passport, because remember, they want to go and live in London. So when they're in charge, they will list these entities in London with the hope that they will be asked to go and run the London office. When you have Anna Darko here, 10 years ago, Anna Darko, we say to some of these oil majors, it says $1 billion US you can buy Anna Darko. But the people who are running the companies at that time want to emigrate. They don't. 10 years later, today, you must Google it. Anna Darko's value is 20 billion in less than 10 years. So be very clear about who you are putting in those entities for the betterment of the rest of the people. You see, he calls himself comfort. We had coffee 2 days ago. As we stood up to go out at the door, we looked at each other in the centerpiece of the pupils of our eyes and we said, we must normalize, highlight and celebrate Black excellence. Black excellence must be what we wake up to as normal and go to sleep hoping for.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, May, and thank you, Doc. As the closing remarks, I know you've closed the road to 2026 elections.
So let's be clear about who we elect as our leaders. Because the one thing that we get wrong is we forget that the 400 MPs actually work for us. When they walk into the room, we stand to attention. But they work for us. When we're not happy with them after 5 years, in the Americas it's 4 years, after 5 years, let's elect other leaders. But you see, if we don't think for ourselves, we place our future in the hands of others. It is up to us to create our own new world. When you invest in other Black people, it's enlightened self-interest. Because one day, you do it because a gift is pure when it comes from the heart to the right person at the right time, expecting nothing in return. But it's called the old boys network. Because today, they can say, oh, my daughter, you have gone to university, you've now graduated. You've been looking for a job for 2 years. You are threatened to get into depression. Go to Koos Becker and tell him that I sent you. and goes back and looks at you and says, which Viljoen are you? No, he said, when can you start? No interview. But black people celebrate when they go home. To say, "Wabona kajeno ke ba greets, ke ba butsitse Helen too." When you invest in your own people, it becomes possible for you to say, "Nkgono Maneo, tsamaya ho ntate Peggy Sibeya Sotobe," and tell him I send you. Peggy looks at her and says, "Which Mohale are you?" He says, "Ke ngwana Bonang." When can you start? No interview, nothing. Because I can tell you that when a Jewish person has a piece of land in Sandton, the architect will be Jewish. The builder will be Jewish. The electrician will be Jewish. Because the Jewish people wake up every day, and the Muslims and the Afrikaners, they probably have no more than 10 secrets why they are the ones that made the most amount of money in the 30 years that we became free. Our freedom, they laugh all the way to the bank. They ask a question: do you as a family and as a community sit together around the table and talk about how to make money? Do you as a family and as a community buy from each other and one another? Do you as a family and as a community invest in and refer business to each other and one another? That's what they do. And they have the money. So when you sell insurance, who will you sell to? Who has the capacity to buy your insurance? Because you're not invested in enough black people that will be able to buy your product. There's only 425,000 people who have registered with SARS that they earn $1 million and above.
Can national dialogues in public and private partnerships fill the gaps in government leadership?
I honestly feel like we've been having dialogues as a country for
far too long,
or forever. I think it's time for action. But I think, it's also a call of, going back to Hloni's question around what are we going to do? How are we going to be active citizens to contribute positively to building this country? And I think it goes back to that. Let's talk more action, and let's bring each other in.
Amen.
Okay, so to summarize my response to that, let me again, I use stats because I said I'm an African realist, and I'm using what poor Andrew, I'm using his half full, because I want to leverage on in terms of where South Africa is, which is also to a certain extent they've made progress, albeit the challenges that have to be dealt with. Since 1950, there have been 450 coup d'etats in the world. Okay, coup d'etats in terms of governments being overthrown. 220 of them have been Africa. 109 of them have been successful. And I usually say in my keynotes, as Africa, we are subject matter experts when it comes to coup d'etats. But none of them have been in South Africa. There is no philosopher, historical economics, you name it, who could have put the outcome of South Africa last year based on where it was with regards to a JNU or GNU or GNU or DNU being formed. It was a shock to the political forecasts and economists. It was peaceful. So what am I trying to highlight? I think when I initially spoke, I said, guys, if the most divisive statement that was said by the most powerful president in the world was said pre-GNU, with EFF where it was, with DA where it was, without a white agricultural minister, that's the irony of your life, where would South Africa be? So when I look at 2026, in terms of the road there, I'm saying to South Africa, all the things that my colleagues have highlighted, in terms of practicalities, accountability, all have to be there. But I seriously believe that the democracy model for South Africa will have to be an upgrade of where the GNU is now. It will be different. It will be uncomfortable for both the black, the white, the Indian. I can't go down the colored. You know, the guys. I'm diverse. But what I'm real, you know, I think it was Einstein who said that when you're trying to solve a problem, sometimes do not look at what the steps that cause that problems in solving it. You actually have to think innovatively. And what I'm trying to say, even the political model, because a few years ago, when you looked at DEI, it was America was the benchmark. When you looked at climate change, America was the benchmark. When you looked at democracy, America was the benchmark. All of that has been destroyed. If Africa does not have its own value system and practicality and model that's relevant and practical, guys who are going to be chasing after headless chickens all over the place. So here's an opportunity in South Africa to bring and instill the right model that is relevant to South Africa, that is straight, that is accountable, that brings up big excellence. That's non-negotiable. But you have to be open-minded and in terms of rolling out the solution. And that's what I would recommend for on the road to 2020. And if you want to vote me as president, please then just Professor, I'll make you finance because I know I'll get my money.
Launching your campaign.
He's launching his campaign. Thank you, Doc. President, I think we have a challenge, a big one. We have a challenge to say where to from here, and what's our next. And with those words, I would like to officially thank our honored guests who have shared valuable insights. The evening is not enough, is not enough to address some of the questions. And we believe that we will have this conversation not only, but as a plan of action to say where to from next, and what do we do, what action steps do we need to take to hold our government accountable. When I was growing up, 1990, we used to chant, it's the government for the people, by the people, with the people. We need to action and hold our government accountable. Thank you for spending the evening with us. Can we give them a round of applause? At this point, I will call upon, oh, before you leave, we have some gifts. Pardon me. We are bribing you on behalf of Doc with this new political party.
You save the best for last.
I told you that we are in the month of love and the week of love. You can see the roses are red. Thank you.
Thank you, yours? You must not be able to discriminate, right? Thank you. This one is for my favorite guy.
Thank you, President. At this point, I will call upon our Managing Director, Mr. Monde Ndlovu, to give us our closing remarks. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I won't spend too much time. Firstly, we really want to thank you for coming out in large numbers as well. This post-SONA dialogue is intended to be an annual event, and it is the second time we're doing it in partnership with Henley Business School, and also Alex Forbes. So we greatly appreciate the partnership. We greatly appreciate the support. And without these dialogues, we can never know what we can experiment with in terms of ideas, in terms of objectives, and being exposed to such great insights. If we don't dialogue, then we'll never know how far we can think and how far we can stretch our minds. So yes, I understand Sisloni's frustration, but without the dialogues, then we won't be able to be agitated even further to act in a particular direction. So thank you very much to our support and our partners. We really, truly appreciate it. Ezandle. If you don't clap, I'll speak forever. So that's the first part. Secondly, would like to also thank, in particular in his absence, Professor John Foster Pedley. Since we signed our partnership agreement with them last year, he's opened up the whole school to BMF in more ways than one. So there's certain aspects of our agreement, and even the past week or two, that we really need to bed down in terms of implementing what we agreed upon. One of the areas that are critical, even from this conversation, is the whole research aspect of things. And so we've been talking about that, been engaging the school about that. So please watch out for that in terms of where we want to go around research and development, even emanating from ideas and discussions from these sorts of that. Really, we thank Professor John for really opening up Henley Business School, even the relationships in the UK, by the way, and the doc as well, from the business, from the British chamber side as well. So so everything is coming together. If you really look at it, Henley, the British Chamber of Business is coming through. So all the relationships are actually being interwoven as we move along. It is quite deliberate as well. So we thank him in absentia. Exactly. Again, we really want to thank specifically Sisloni Mphahlele. We know that within Alex Forbes, there are questions that are asked about Black organizations generally. We know in corporate, there's a lot of questions being asked about what our relevance is, not just BMF, but all of the whole plethora of Black professional bodies. So we know that you defend the organization, you defend the cause that we stand for. So we appreciate the fact that you continuously stand in the gap. And we've seen that even in the meetings we've had, even with your top brass as well. So we appreciate the fact that even in our absence, you carry the BMF DNA in representing us, along with your colleagues who are here as well tonight within Alex Forbes' family at large. Exactly. We'd also like to thank the BMF president, newly elected president, Mr. Mpho Malopyane. Thank you very much, sir. And the deputy president who is online, Meli Limwabi. We thank you for your leadership. We thank you for allowing us space to do the things that we do. And may you continue to give us more space to do that which we are doing in the organization. Exactly. We also would like to thank the BMF staff and Henley staff who have been an incredible support of what we've been trying to achieve between BMF and Henley. So really, ladies and gentlemen, we really thank you for your hard work. We thank you for your input. We know sometimes that it may be very, very difficult, but you pull through all the stops when we do these events and others that we do in partnership with Henley. So we really thank the BMF staff. I know some of them on the other side as well, and the Henley staff. So thank you very much for your humility and for your hard work. Exactly. And in a very special way, we really would like to thank our panelists. And for starters, Sis Wendy, who is a faithful soldier of the BMF, always ready. Even when we don't call her, she calls us, and she wants to plug the BMF in particular areas. And so we thank you for carrying the spirit of the BMF, the spirit of our stalwarts within you, and we wish you everything of the best for this year, and we'll be calling upon you again. And we know that we owe you other things as well outside of this conversation around what we need to do collectively as an organization. Sabonga kakhulu. We'd also like to thank our stalwart, former President Prof. Bonang Mohale. We cannot say thank you enough. As the BMF, you have led us, even when you're not leading us, you're still leading us. When you're not there, when you keep challenging our thinking to think clearly, with clarity, and holding us accountable to the high BMF values and virtues. So we thank you very much for your input and insight. We cannot thank you enough. And we know that every time BMF calls, you drop everything and you are faithful to the call of the BMF. So we thank you very, very much. With all our humility, we really indeed thank you very much. Aus Malopyane, thank you very much for your insight. Again, you've joined us for the second time in a row, and you keep giving us an opportunity to dig further within what you have to share with us as well. And so we thank you very much for your insight as we continue to build our relationship going forward between ourselves, Alex Forbes, and yourself as well. So Siyabonga kakhulu Siswam. And to Dr. Hwindingwi. I hope I've said it correctly, Doc. Thank you very much. Thank you for your insight. Thank you for the call. We know we spoke together through John as well. So thank you very much. And we've met in other places as well. And we really appreciate your insight. And we will be knocking at your door again because there's even much more that we can learn as well, especially with the picture that you've given about the continent, and all the statistics that you've given will also give us impetus as we further craft, especially what the president had said in how BMF wants to play a bigger role in the entrepreneurship space. And so we'll be calling you once again to assist us in our thought process going forward. We thank you very much. And as I step off, I just want to leave you all with this BMF principle. BMF has got 7 principles. I won't read all of them, but I'll just share one with you. It's number 5, and it is solely in line with what we've shared. And it says, an African-centered management and leadership perspective which takes South Africa as a point of departure in relating to the global political economy. And so what we've been discussing in sharpening our views and perspectives, we're trying to create our own unique way of looking and understanding not just ourselves, but also understanding the world we operate in. And so it is very critical as we continue to shape these perspectives that we own them, that we have developed these lenses of how to understand our role in the world that is continuously emerging. And that is a BMF principle. And ladies and gentlemen, we are also looking forward to hosting a post-budget in the next few weeks as well. Look out for that information as well. And then BMF members, please respond to the survey. Please do so. If you're not a BMF member, please join the movement. We are 50 next year, right? So really, it's a special organization. It would be great for us to continue to work together in fulfilling the mandate of our stalwarts and the cause of economic transformation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, lovely to meet you, Nandi.
We're now busy opening a branch in
Okay.
just joined BMF.
Okay.
So this is my first BMF event.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you, Nandi.